Hello everyone and welcome to Project Insights Agile webinar. The topic for today is SOW for Agile Engagements. Just a few things to note before we get started. All participants will be put on mute. However, any questions you have are more than welcome. Please go ahead and type those questions into your question box, which you can find on your GoToWebinar dashboard. All of our Agile trainings are valid for 1 PDU free of charge. However, you must be in attendance for the full session. I will email you your PDU certificate by the end of today. So I do please ask that you hold off on emailing me about your certificate until then. And for those of you that are interested in the recording and slides, those will also be sent to you via email by tomorrow morning. My name's Denise, and I will be your moderator for today. I'm on the marketing team here at Project Insight. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, please feel free to reach me at denise.rodriguez@projectinsight.com. If you're not already familiar with Project Insight, we're a professional project and portfolio management software for project-driven organizations that need high-performing features combined with ease of use. Project Insight provides a better way to deliver optimal performance at a lower cost within a central platform. Go ahead and gain end-to-end visibility into the workloads of resources, project budgets, and status with real-time reports. If you would like to learn more, please feel free to schedule your free customized demo today. You can give us a call, send us an email, or request more info at projectinsight.net. I'd like to give a very warm welcome to our presenter today, Dr. Dave Cornelius. Dr. Dave is a value delivery leader at Bio-Rad Laboratories. He influences cross-functional teams to deliver amazing quality products to delight customers. Dr. Dave is the founder of the 5 Saturdays program that empowers high school students through agility and innovation by providing learning experiences in technology and lean business. He is also the author of the book, Transforming Your Leadership Character, The Lean Thinking and Agility Way, and innovator of the game Agility Leadership. Dr. Dave produces a podcast on iTunes and Google Play titled No Sure with Dr. Dave, and can be found hosting on crocshare.com. Welcome, Dave. How are you doing this morning? Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, it's a wonderful Thursday morning. I hope our audience is having a good day today. We have a friend of us hanging out with us named Dan Brown. Dan, how are you doing?
Good morning, Dave. Thank you very much. Great to have me on here with you all. I'm doing great.
2 months in a row. So Dan is a business development executive at Technosis. He's also an Agile enthusiast, a coach, a delivery leadership. You could find Dan on LinkedIn and email. You can see his information on the screen. So you could, if you want to really ping him a lot, just send him an email at dan.brown@technosis.com. So we're going to get going today. And I want to tell you guys that SOWs in the Agile space oftentimes is a challenge for most people. So Denise, can you see my screen? I just want to double check that. Am I sharing?
Give me a second here.
I always have to double check because I can't show my screen. Okay. Okay, magic. Is magic happening,
There
Denise?
You go.
All
magic
right.
Is happening. You're good to go.
Yeah, I want to make sure that's going on. So I just want to tell you that, business leaders, they have a tough time trying to wrangle this Agile SOW, statement of work. And also, I find that even lawyers and people in procurement and the controllers, they want very specific things. They want things all written down and defined way in advance so they could mitigate risks. So in an attempt, just from my experience, I wanted to really bring this to bear that, there are ways of doing this and being very successful at it. And that's why I asked Dan to join me as well. So some of the great topics we're going to cover today is, the types of SOW that's available, the benefits of doing an Agile SOW. We'll look at developing working agreements, because sometimes it's really important to get those in place early. Look at the supplier customer responsibilities and just the anatomy of an Agile SOW. And Dan is going to help me walk through some of that because he does that day to day. And, I've been on the receiving end and also been as a provider as well. So what are you going to learn today? So we want to make sure that you could get out of here and think about how do we develop SOW agreements so that we could have better Agile engagements. The one thing that I thought about is, like, how do we get the vertical slice in? Because traditionally everyone wants to lay out an agreement that's, I guess sometimes 18 months, 2 years or longer. Vertical slice could be as small as 3 months. And we want to just make sure that this allows us as a supplier and even as a customer so we could be more engaged in the process. So why do we really need an SOW anyway? So a lot of people that I talk to, they want to make sure that they have agreements in place in the event of a lawsuit. And I'm like, wow, that's just really a positive attitude going into a relationship, that we want to worry about lawsuits before we even get started. We want to minimize risk, and we want to maximize profits. So if I'm a supplier, I want to make sure that I have the best deal in place so I can make the most money. And the same thing as a customer. I want to make sure that I could get the most out of the relationship and the agreement. So these are some of the key things that people look for. And, like I said, customers want to make sure that they get the greatest benefit. So my experience with doing SOWs, I've worked as a supplier because I've been a consultant for a long time, and I've written many SOWs with different companies across the country. And my goal was always to maximize profits and minimize risk. The same thing, I'm a customer now, so I want to maximize outcomes and minimize risk. So there's a great symbiotic relationship between the two roles, where there are things that I want that I think that's going to be always in the best interests of the company that I work for, or if it's my company or not. So let's look at some of the things. So as a supplier, I've developed and presented these different agreements, negotiated rates. I'm always time and material focused. I want to minimize risk, and I always want to establish an exit clause. How do I get out of this in case this thing goes sideways? Well, also as a supplier, I have the same mindset. I get an agreement, I review that. I want to negotiate rates. I want to look at what are the different outcomes that's coming my way. I make sure that those things are the things that I need. I want to minimize risk and make sure I have an established exit clause. So you could see the two roles, they're kind of looking for kind of the same things. And primarily, it's looking at the benefits. So Dan, just jumping in here, just give us a quick overview of your experience with dealing with different Agile engagements. As you're a supplier, so why don't you take the supplier context, and I'll be in the customer context.
By all means, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. I think these 5 categories are accurate. From a supplier perspective, which I've been in this type of role for a good part of my 20-year-plus career, is presenting these agreements, right? Understanding what the needs are. What is the outcome? What does success mean to the customer, right? And usually you want to define what that scope is going to contain, some of the assumptions, risks, dependencies, constraints, etc. And work very closely with that customer. As Dave, you mentioned, you and I have worked together as a supplier and you as a customer. And we've had great conversations to figure out what is that vision, how do we meet that and accomplish that for you. Time and material is certainly one of the easier approaches, the most preferred approaches in my opinion as a supplier, because it minimizes those risks. There are some cases, and I know you'll talk about a little bit later, but there's some that are fixed fee, where you have to have a little bit more information. So we'll talk about a little bit later, how do you write an SOW to accommodate that? But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that both of you are successful and set up for success in a way that you can continue that relationship ongoing and continue and extend SOWs for both, so both can achieve what the key objectives are.
All right, so thank you for that input. So let's look at the 4 types of SOW, and these things have been around for a while. So there's 4. There's a fixed price, right, where we know all the specs, we know we have a specific date, and if we want to make any changes, there's a fee. And as a supplier, that's a big risk in that context, right? Because basically, if there are any changes or things are not well defined, well, I may have to eat a few costs, or may have to go back and have a change request or a change order where we have to ask the customer for more money. The other one is a target price, where we also have fixed specifications and date, and there's a target price that we want to achieve. And now, this is something that, as a supplier, you spend time trying to negotiate exactly what that target price is. And there's some level of a shared risk in this model, because even though we have a fixed spec and date, one of the things that you don't know as a customer is like, well, am I going to get everything that I really need and at the highest quality so they can have the great benefit? I mean, the third one is open. The third one is time and material, and this is the one that is most common, where the specifications could be not as well defined, right? It gives you some room there. The price is based on a person doing the work and the different things that you're producing, but it gives some flexibility to the customer to say, you know what, this is enough. I've had enough. I want to get off of this train, but this is also a great risk to the customer. The fourth is like cost plus, so also you have a targeted specs and date. If there's any type of profit margins and you see this a lot in the construction phase and the construction business at certain industries like that, where you have this type of cost plus type contract. And then also you also see a heavy risk there to customers. So Dan, of these 4, which one do you really prefer if you have to pick one of the 4?
Hands down, in my industry, which is IT consulting solutions, we prefer number 3, the time and material, because to your point, right, it's a little bit more flexible. It minimizes some of the risks, and we can pivot where needed to support our customers and goals and solutions. By far, number 3.
Okay, awesome. So it's time for us to have a little group interaction, Denise. We wanted to see, if we look at the type of SOW, so select the SOW type with the highest risk to customers. Is it A, time and material, B, target price, C, firm fixed price, or D, cost plus? What do you guys think? So Dan, as our group and our participants are answering that question, any pitfalls do you see in time and material, as we call T&M?
Well, there's some pitfalls and certainly some learnings. I can do a quick share. I think sometimes when you're going into a project, you still don't know what you don't know, and there's some assumptions you need to validate. As you progress through it, I think it's always important to have that open, collaborative communication to the customers directly along the way. And if some of the project starts to burn hot, if there's some high demands and people are trying to figure out each other as we're through the storing phase, especially in early sprints in the longer Agile framework roadmap, it's important to communicate the times you've invested, how much time you're burning along the way, so there's no surprises at the end, especially if you're going above your original estimated amount.
Most excellent. So Denise, how are we doing?
Okay.
Well, I mean, the correct answer is really A, because that's where we have the highest amount of risk to the customers. And so, Dan, would you agree with that also?
There's a lot of risk for that, right? The risk is shifted from the supplier to the customer, and I would agree.
Yeah. Okay. So, about 50% think time and material. So, or 46. So the highest number wins. So let's move along to our next slide. So here are some of the conversations that I've had with legal and controllers and procurement. The things that they want is like, we must list every feature in the SOW, even though, you may not know all of that information up front. They think that you have to do it. They said every feature must have a specified end date. Well, when do we know we're going to get this widget? Well, I work in software. So obviously in software, the widgets sometimes shift and has a different shape than the original intention. And so they need to know that so that they feel comfortable. And then you say, well, how do we know when done is achieved? Well, you try to explain to them that we have a definition of done and a definition of ready, but no, that's too loosey-goosey, not tight enough. The other thing is that, we have to protect ourselves against litigation. Again, there we go again. The only thing that we want to think about is being sued, as opposed to how do we build a stronger partnership and relationship with our vendors or suppliers. I mean, Dan, could you add one or two to this list?
Sorry. Yes. I think you nailed it. Conversations, legal, VMO, vendor management office, like to have as much detail as possible. So what do you have to do, right? And what can you commit to that when they're not familiar with an agile environment, they're used to more waterfall projects, requirements, and so forth. So how would we know that? We don't. So working with them and also building that relationship with those are almost just as important when you're initializing your statement of work than you are with your actual buyer in itself. And I think you have to put yourself in their shoes, but also, again, have some type of clause where you can have some flexibility to make sure you can have some of those adjustments and pivot to meet the customer's needs, but also satisfy the legal controls procurement requirements.
That's correct. Correcto. So traditional versus agile SOW. And so when we look at the attributes of a traditional engagement, we think of it as, it's fixed and it's based on milestones. Any type of priority changes, you need to go through a change order and get that approved by many stakeholders. There's some high degree of trust that the supplier has to have in terms of, I need to buy into the fact that the customer themselves who are involved, can specify that information accurately enough. We know we try to define all of the outcomes up front, which we know that's impossible. And in most cases, they're large and sometimes even long-term. I say 9 to 18 months, but for me, because I live in an agile world, to me that's a forever thing. But they could even be longer than that. But when we look at agile engagements, they're like really fluid and they're based on this prioritized backlog. What's number one? And there's always only one number one. We are open to change. If we want to shift priorities, that's okay, which kind of screws with your SOW if everything is based on milestones and different dates. So it's hard to change priorities. We also have to have great customer trust in this as well, because basically now the customer also has to look at us as a supplier and said, okay, I feel comfortable enough with hiring Dan and Technosis to sit there and help us get through our prioritized backlog and get this work done. We don't always know what the outcomes are, right? Sometimes we're saying, well, we're going to provide a resource who will help support our teams and help them to be better in building a cloud type solution. And I'm just throwing that out there, but that is something that, what does that really mean, right? And if I am a legal mind, well, what does that really mean? I need it to be very specific. Now, we do things in very short iterative time frame. So 2 to 3 months is really the length of an SOW where we could actually get through this rather quickly. So we're going to move on and talk about challenges of an Agile SOW. And Dan is going to kick in here after I present some of these bullet points. So one of the things as a supplier, I want to avoid as much risk as possible. And we don't want, fixed price agreements. So we're heavily focused on time and material. When there is a fixed SOW, we know that suppliers take on a higher risk, and we really don't want that. We love time and material because it helps to reduce the risk as a supplier, and then it increases the risk to the actual customer himself. We know that you have to wrangle with our legal representatives in the organization because they want very specific things. And oftentimes we may not be able to give them the exact thing that they're looking for, but we could give them a high-level overview of that. So, Dan, as you're putting an Agile SOW together, what are some of the challenges that you face?
I think a lot of it determines on the maturity of the organization we're working with, who understands and experienced with Agile. Those that are more experienced with traditional waterfall engagements can be a little bit more difficult and takes very much time and a lot of back and forth negotiations and red lines to make sure that they're meeting expectations so that from their perspective, they're minimizing the risk. And that's their job on here. And I think that can be a challenge, right? And it takes time and a lot of effort to build that relationship and understanding. And then at the end of the day, partnership is the key word that comes to my mind for all those, whether you're working with a mature organization or not, right? You have that partnership, that clear understanding, and like you called it very accurately, that level of trust with the specific buyer and the legal. Nothing is more important than having your own buyer work with you on your side and behalf to help explain to the legal department where they have the credibility and help navigate through some of those waters and questions to help expedite the SOW. Now, the challenge is time, too. To your point around the 2 to 3 month iterations, that means you're writing a lot of paperwork, even starting it halfway through before you're even done with the initial SOW. So the more you can get into that cadence and understanding is very, very important to have that in that working agreement.
Excellent. So we walk right into developing working agreements. One thing that we can do as we're going through the process of putting an SOW together is to start to establish a working agreement, as a team. So the first thing that we say is like, can we agree to establish working agreements so that we could establish, we don't establish some level of trust between, we don't say we want to establish trust, but we want to get an agreement that we should put something together that this is how we're going to work together to produce an SOW. We have to acknowledge that change is constant, and the idea that you could get everything written in stone and that's never going to change, it's not realistic. So acknowledging that up front as you're working as a supplier-customer relationship, that change is constant, that's going to happen. And so as you go through this process, you think about, how do we inspect and adapt where we're making changes within the confines of time and money, right? Because those are two very important things, so that we could adjust scope, right? To make sure that we're getting the maximum value out of the relationship. And I think it's really critical that as we establish a working agreement, we look at what are the beneficial value outcomes, right? And I use these 3 words, beneficial, value, and outcomes together, because we want to make sure that whatever is produced benefits both and it adds value to both, right, in terms of establishing that working agreement. The other thing is how do we harmonize the economic interests of both, right, the supplier and the customer? And I know it's hard because there's always a give and take. And, I have this conversation with Dan, well, hey, this is what we want to pay. This is what we could afford, and this is what you can. So, Dan, quickly in this point, think of ways that we could achieve this complementary economic interest that we could harmonize, as a supplier-customer. Why don't you give us some feedback on that?
Yeah, well, it's always an interesting topic, right? And it can be something that changes depending on how mature your relationship and partnership really is. When you're trying to understand, new relationships, especially with new SOWs, from a supplier perspective that I'm often in, right? It's more important to focus on what is the output that you're looking to achieve, as you stated earlier, right? On there, instead of focusing on the dollar amount, what is the value looking to achieve? What does success look like to the customer? And then once you get that worked out and understood, and then you define that scope, then you have to figure out what are the constraints that they're working on financially. How do you adjust that? And it's like the old triple constraint, right? You can adjust scope and time and dollars accordingly, but you don't want to compromise quality. So you come to an agreement that's a win-win from a financial perspective for both, right? And sometimes you have to get creative. Get creative with some investment of consulting time, right, to kind of prove yourself in the beginning. And there's other ways to kind of even do some simple like proof of concepts, or even come up with a high-level backlog. There's a lot of great creative ways to understand how do you flex on that economic interest and the financial constraints within the customer's budget. And then obviously as it matures over time, you can work better together to make sure that each is in a happy place and both are successful to establish a very true working partnership.
Most excellent, Dan. Thank you for that feedback. Now, I want to ask this questions to the group again. Working agreements help to establish trust and boundaries. Is that true or false? And while Denise get our participants to ponder this question, Dan, let's talk about the differences between Agile and traditional SOW. In the context of how do we pretty much work through a backlog, a fluid backlog of information, because it exists whether we're doing traditional or agile practices. What do you see the differences between that in terms of managing through our backlog?
Usually, traditionally, you spend a lot more time up front, right? It's a typical analysis and planning stages where you spend all the time, sometimes even do an assessment mini SOW just to figure out what the rest of the project is going to look like to execute along the way and manage and control till you finally transition it off. And those are longer engagements, like you pointed out. Some could be 9 months, 18 months, 3 years, depending on what type of enterprise software solution you also do in my organization. But lately, I'm seeing more SOWs and a lot of customers wanting more agile-like, flexible work, right? And those SOWs tend to change, right? But how do you write those SOWs? And what changes? You've identified a lot of great points. In addition to that, sometimes you have to have some type of milestones along the way. The more mature organizations I see, Dave, is that they like to see just more ceremony-based outputs that you want to come be measured against for milestones, right? Those typical ceremonies. That way you can have a cadence to invoice the customers accordingly. But sometimes you want to get, they want more of a backlog defined ahead of time. So you have to work with them to understand those quote-unquote requirements so you can come up at least a high-level backlog and estimations to kind of figure out when you're looking to develop. But again, at least some elements of flexibility, which is even more important, that element of trust, flexibility into your partnership and working agreement.
Thank you, Dan. Denise, what does our participants say today? I think they're really paying attention today that working agreements help to establish trust and boundaries. They're wonderful things to have. Thank you so much, 98%. Now, let's look at the benefits of an Agile SOW. So one of the good things about, and Dan has talked about this, about pivot and shift based on customer demands, so that we're not stuck going down a certain path. We can come in and based on our working agreements that we can shift and said, let's instead of building this screen now, why don't we defer that until later and build this UI instead? So you could pivot and shift as needed, based on the needs of the customer. So we could also limit, the amount of risks that are involved. So we could do things as short as 1 month. 1 to 3 months. 3 months is really the sweet spot. Some organization would want to make it even tighter and have it at 2 months, so that they're mitigating risk as much as possible. I mean, customer and suppliers in this regards, we're sharing the risk together, because the wonderful thing of this is that the customer says, like, okay, the most that I could be out at any one point in time is 3 months. Also, the same thing with the supplier in terms of their risk and reward is that, I have to produce value every day that I come into my customer, and that's the focus. And so they're sharing in those rewards, but also their risk, because sometimes you're not on your A game and you may have to give a little bit more at some point in time to make sure that, we're satisfying the needs of the customer. And I think one of the things that people tend to forget is that we could have short value streams. And what those value streams are, it's nothing more than a definition and organization of different activities that we have to engage in to make sure that we could deliver value. So we know from the start to the end, what does it look like to really deliver value to our customer? I think one of the things that we miss out on, and I just recently did one of my earlier presentation talking about get 4x more from organizations that are involved with agile practices, is that we have to be able to articulate the cost of delay. That if we have to wait 18 months to get a value back to the customer, and even the customer's customers, there's a cost for that. And if we could do shorter increments, we can begin to get feedback from our customers a lot faster, and we could make the appropriate decisions in terms of pivoting and shifting based on market demands and not just as a supplier customer demands. Dan, benefits of Agile SOW.
These are all the key points, David. I think I love the value streams to define, organize, and deliver value. It's all about value, and value can be subjective sometimes, and the more you can objectify and quantify it to have quantifiable benefits they can realize and measure, and you can help the customer be successful with their leadership, will help, again, with that working agreement and that relationship here. If you do limit those SOWs to 1 to 3 months, especially in the beginning, that's great. You can kind of test and see how each other work and function. It's no different than a Scrum team. It takes a little bit to kind of build that collaborative, safe environment for them to really speak and shine. But again, the number one is being able to pivot, that flexibility to reprioritize as you learn new things. That's where Agile, the whole Agile framework of delivery is phenomenal, and that's why it's becoming more and more popular and why so many people are calling into this webinar today. Right? Things change. With the traditional one, you're stuck, right? And you've gone down the path, and sometimes success changes, and you can deliver exactly what you committed to in your SOW, but over time, sometimes that's not the priority, right? Funding's change, right? So a lot of those projects end up failing. At least at this one, you can pivot, you can change, and sometimes that does happen, and so you need to have that big boy conversation with leadership. If there is some type of delay, what does that cost mean? Is it a scope cost where you have to change the scope or change the date right on here? You have to figure out where can you flex without compromising quality, and have those conversations of how it aligns with the bigger picture of the roadmap, what you ultimately want to achieve the success throughout, not only for the project but for the organization.
Most excellent. So as we talk about the responsibilities of the customer and the supplier, here's a few things that I've called out as a customer that we have to be responsible for. All right. So we have to have a concise vision and roadmap. Oftentimes, people have no idea where they're going, and they're just throwing things together. So as a customer, I need to have a clear vision and a roadmap so I can share that with my supplier and my partner. We have to make sure that we could communicate this in a very effective way, and so that our supplier has the ability, and I use supplier and partner interchangeably, so that our partners could have an opportunity to make the right decisions if they want to engage in this SOW in the first place. There should be a shared path for a successful partnership, and as a customer, I have to establish that. I believe that that's really a huge responsibility of the customer, and relieve that burden away from the partnership itself in terms of working with the supplier. And sometimes we are going to have a fixed intent. So I have a fixed amount of work that I need to get done, but there's other things that I may have flexibility. And so that's one of the things that we have to work through with our partner. It's, you know, look, I know that in this time box, we have to get this done. There's no room for change. Now, working with that partner, it's like, how do you help me achieve that? I know over here I have a bit more flexibility. So that's what we're talking about in terms of fixed and variable intent. And the intent is the work that we have to produce and the outcomes that we have to produce as a business itself to really adjust to the market itself. Now, we also know that, yeah, this responsibility of success is a shared thing. And it's not just based on, you know, I hired you, I paid you this amount of dollars, I expect you to get this done. Yes, that's one part of it. But the other part of it is that the customer has to also participate in that process to ensure that there's some level of success. So we're going to go on and look at, no, what about the supplier responsibilities, right? They need to understand the customer vision and roadmap. We need to go ahead and look at what is the feasibility of this solution intent that I'm providing. I mean, can I get this done? I mean, can I get it done together with the team? I mean, is the customer able to provide enough resources and time to achieve this goal? We also have to look at we talked about time and material. So we need to understand the resource needs and the duration requirements. If I bring an architect in, you know, how long do I need that architect to be on the project? Do I need them for the full duration, or maybe I just need them, you know, 100% at the top, 50% in the middle, and maybe 25% at the end? We have to be able to do that as a supplier. What is the objective, you know, so we can establish this evidence of fitness for use? You know, how useful is the things that we're producing? Dan, as a supplier, what are your thoughts in this in terms of responsibilities?
I love what you're saying here. The messages are completely accurate and relevant. One of the best scenarios where I like to see where we do establish that partnership between the customer and the supplier is not only when we both understand the vision when we're starting off, and then even reiterating it along the way and making sure we're all on the same path to the vision, but when I use this kind of phrase and quotes, the skin in the game. When we both have skin in the game and we not only understand the roadmap, but we can both, especially as a supplier, can contribute to the roadmap. Maybe even help develop the roadmap, right, and adjust it and make sure it is accurate, the best to our knowledge, right, and address the milestones along the way so we can track the velocity on there. And it has the flexibility with new information that if we have to adjust, pivot, reprioritize, we can do so, but still achieve the end-in-mind game so we can all be successful together. And that's what's key. And that's what's important really for the long-term relationships and partnerships.
Okay. And one key thing is to make sure that we have a just prioritized backlog. And that's also key. So as we pivot in, you know, we think of, you know, how do we really put this thing together of an Agile SOW? I mean, one approach, and this is where the shared partnership comes in, is to use what we call a sprint zero to determine a prioritized backlog. And I know, Dan, you kind of alluded to that in terms of the supplier having the need to invest in this process. And so a sprint normally is 2 weeks long. So we're talking about using 2 weeks of time to really help to produce that backlog to help flush out that roadmap. We want to make sure that the expectation is really appropriate. As we're going through and we're looking at this backlog, now we have tangible things that we could look at and said, look, we could lay out at least maybe 2 to 3 sprints or more, or even longer, if we spend 2 weeks up front prioritizing what's important to our customers and the customers' market. And so I think that it's really important for us to build out value-focused metrics as we're going through and setting up an SOW. And I like to measure at a feature level. I know some people in the Agile space like to measure at a story level and think about predictability. I think predictability is understood over time based on the work that we're doing. I like to measure at a feature level. That's something that we could take to the customer. And so that's one of the things that I think it's really, really important, really key that those value metrics are at a level where everyone in the organization can really understand and get a good, clear picture of where you're going and how that relates back to the roadmap. But also it's to partner and have realistic goals of trying to make sure that there's this give and take in this relationship that we're building. And one thing that could also help, and I know, Dan, you hang out at our at one of our 2-day big room planning. I think that also is another great experience where we could begin to understand at a 3-month level, what level of work needs to be done. And part of that is also, as we build these SOW, is that we begin to educate our customers so they can start having this lean thinking, value streams, eliminate waste, think about flow, and we can start to educate our customers about agile practices. Any thoughts, Dan, about the anatomy of an agile SOW?
Yeah, it evolves, right? It depends how mature the organization you're working with or in is, right? In some experiences, and Dave, you have the pleasure of doing this directly and influencing and actually leading it, is when you scale. And it's one of the topics I know we'll probably elaborate on, but when you scale, things change a little bit, right? You've got multiple work streams, you've got other departments and dependencies you have to expose, and so it is a very beautiful experience when you do it successfully in those multi-day planning sessions from different departments, and leadership can see the bigger picture together and kind of see how it aligns to the roadmap and influence to some degree on there. And it's an opportunity for everyone to hear it at once at the same time, the single source of messaging, so there's not any confusion of misinterpretation and questions can be asked. And I think if you do it effectively, that can be great to align your vision appropriately and maybe change and enhance some of the SOW milestones you're committing to, especially if you don't have the luxury to go towards a committed time and materials SOW if you have to do fixed fee. At least it helps eliminate some of the risk because you are kind of defining some of the backlog as you go, and you can provide the estimates accordingly.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've worked at a large organization where we, at the end of our 2-day big room planning, where we have these cross-functional teams, we would sit with our partner and lay out our SOW for the next quarter. So in that way, we know everyone was on the same page in terms of what was on the roadmap and what the deliverables are and the expected outcomes. Okay, let's talk about how would a Sprint Zero help define an Agile SOW? So would it be A, create a prioritized backlog, B, ensure zero impediments, C, synchronize multiple teams, D, guarantees a successful Agile project? What do you guys think? And while our audience is out there noodling on this, Dan, let's talk about how does Sprint Zero, and I know sometimes it's new to some people, how does Sprint Zero really help us with prioritizing work?
Well, Sprint Zero is foundational, right? And it helps get everyone on the same page. It helps even start aligning some of the features to your point on here, which is great, right? To kind of understand what is it you're trying to achieve, and what it helps you also lay out with some high-level T-shirt size estimating and figure out what you can accomplish in that 2 to 3 month, maybe quarterly commitment, and it helps bring things into reality. So the Sprint Zero is very informative in so many ways to kind of figure out what is it you're going to commit to over the next iteration, and is that something that's, to your point earlier, Dave, is it realistic? And you talk it through, right, on here. And I think that helps level set and make sure that you are moving to the right velocity and committing to the right prioritized backlog of items as well, because you've thought through it together as a partnership with the supplier and the customer together. It can be very advantageous throughout the health of the project and, of course, the success of achieving the vision that you're ultimately committing to and agreeing to.
Excellent. So, Denise, what say our audience today? Majority says A, create a prioritized product backlog. And that's true. So that's what we use Sprint Zero to do, is help us to establish a backlog, especially when things are really fluid. And usually you would only use that at the beginning of an engagement. It's not something that you should use very often, because after you get through the first one and the first 3 months, you should at least have some type of a cadence where you can begin to establish backlogs going forward. So let's just keep going. So in summary, before we get to some questions, I want to let you know that, yes, Agile SOW do help to limit risk, and we could use shorter durations to help us to achieve that. And customers and suppliers, they share risk and rewards together, which is a beautiful thing. They also have the shared amount of responsibilities for success. So it isn't like you set up an SOW, hey, supplier, go build this, and you check out. You have to be engaged. You have to, frequently check in with your supplier and see what's going on. And we have to have this shared and this desired path for a successful partnership. Because in the end of the day, that's one of the key factors that help us to be, really successful. So, Dan, in terms of summary, what do you want to, in about a minute or so, what do we want you wrap up here as a summary, from your context?
My context from a supplier perspective, working with the customer, the more quickly you can develop that cadence of communications to establish that relationship right up from the beginning along the way, to establish trust, and really continuously building and strengthening that partnership is critical to success, right? That's why Dave and I meet on a regular basis to kind of talk about the health of the project and the team, right? Not only our team, but his team, and kind of get that feedback. That continuous feedback loop is important and in so many ways, right? So we understand how we can better work together, and as a supplier, we always want to continuously improve as well. How do we continue to add value and maybe expedite success and celebrate those wins and milestones along the way, right? Because our customer success is our success, right? So we're help, right, oftentimes behind the scenes, and we can be those humbled servant leaders along the way to help, again, share some of those risks, yes, but minimize those risks through that collaboration and the partnership that we were establishing, and then more importantly, celebrate those rewards, those successful milestones together to have that fruitful relationship. And once you get into that cadence from a supplier perspective, we want to aim to expand and lengthen those SOW durations, and hopefully once that trust is established, not only with the customer and initial buyer, but also with the legal and procurement and vendor management offices where they exist, so you can have a longer-term SOW. So it's less paperwork. We're not focusing on that, but more focusing on delivering successful results for all of our customers.
Excellent. So, Denise, we have about 12 minutes. And so in terms of questions and our wrap-up, let's see if we could get some questions from our attendees, and we could provide some feedback for them.
All right. So let's see. Let's start with the first one. Could you please articulate examples of specific customer benefits?
Well, customer benefits. Well, as a customer, one simple thing is that I talk about risks, and if you walk through this presentation, you would see the words risks in there frequently. And the thing is the benefit with shorter durations gives us an opportunity to inspect and adapt, to pivot, to shift out of a bad situation, or to avoid going down the wrong path. So to me, clearly as a customer on that side, that's one of the things that I want to do, because basically we want to reduce waste. If I'm building the wrong thing and I don't discover that until 9 months, 18 months down the road, I have wasted hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, on an engagement where that really impacts the stakeholders and shareholders of the organization. And for me as an employee of an organization, I want to avoid that at all cost. So shorter durations, that's a clear benefit that we can mitigate risk, we could increase value, and we could drive a stronger partnership, from a customer context. And I'll give the next question to Dan.
How can this reduce risk for both at the same time?
So I'll pass that on to Dan so we can share in the burden.
Great. How do we reduce risk for both at the same time? Again, through open collaboration. If you take some of the approaches that Dave had articulated, initially where you can invest in a sprint zero to determine high-level business value, all right, so both agree what the top priorities are, what the business value you're going to deliver, and how do you have, I'll tie into the last question, quantifiable benefits along the way that you can measure progress along the way and make sure you achieve and maybe even surpass them. That's huge, right? In eliminating risk, you always want to manage the risk and mitigate them along the way. If there's risk in the beginning of the project, the risk that you're going to identify and expose during the project. And then, of course, hopefully by the end of the time, you've mitigated and addressed all those for the customer and supplier and for the project in itself, right? And obviously, you want to get ahead of it before any risks are escalated into issues on there. And that goes with great management. The Scrum Master can help you through that. There's some project management fundamentals if you need to kind of manage those along the way. Absolutely key. But again, address them on a regular basis with the team openly and escalate them to your product owner or the sponsors of the project. As long as you have that safe, trusted environment that you've established those working agreements with, it should be a fruitful and beneficial conversation. If you don't, right, then those issues could be escalating risks escalating issues. Then you have a different conversation that's not so pleasant, right? And the key is to establish that partnership so you do have that level of trust to talk about openly and figure them out collaboratively so you do have a healthy relationship throughout the life of the project and the life of the relationship with the supplier and the customer.
Awesome, thank you. And can you please kind of summarize the top 3 takeaways from today's presentation?
The top 3, and I think I kind of summarized them before in terms of our summary. I would say, Dan brought up risk, and I keep bringing up risk, is that we want to make sure that we could limit risk by using shorter durations. Make sure that the responsibilities and for success and the rewards and also the risk is a shared thing between the supplier and the customers. And I think the last thing is we have to establish and share in this desired path for successful partnership, because that's what's really going to will allow you to have this long-term relationship that I could pick up the phone or send Dan a text and said, hey, I have this situation. I need your support to help us become successful in this. Dan understands what that looks like. He could participate in that. And that, to me, are the top 3 things that we look at. Shorter durations, limit risk, build that shared value in terms of engaging around what success looks like and really just sharing out of our partnership. So Dan, give us a minute in terms of how would you summarize the top 3, in terms of a takeaway from this presentation?
Yeah, those are important. And I think it all starts in the beginning with your relationship between the customer and supplier. Right. One of the key takeaways is what is the maturity of the organization? What's the level of trust that you already have established? Is it new a relationship or is it a mature relationship? And then it boils down to the type of SOW that we talked about right in the beginning, Dave. Right.
Yep.
The time and material ones, SOWs, allow some flexibility. Right. There's less risk, especially from the supplier perspective on there. And as long as the communications are transparent and frequent along your velocity of the teams, then you can minimize risk from both sides, especially from the customer perspective. The fixed fees, right, there's a different conversation, right? The sprint zeros become a little bit more important because you want to minimize as much as possible the risk from a supplier perspective. So I do believe that the key high-level points that Dave made around the partnership, right, minimizing risks and understanding the responsibilities are very important. The durations, right, those, the shorter durations in the beginning, so you understand, you can kind of pivot and reprioritize, great, especially if you're a fixed fee, that's fairly important. Then as you build that relationship, those durations hopefully will expand and get a little bit longer, 6 months, even 12 months. We've been writing a lot, 12-month SOWs in an Agile environment because they like what we've delivered. It's less paperwork we have to manage, and then it's more with at least procurement. And then we manage the paperwork to justify the benefits, the value we're delivering along the way, right? And have those conversations. And sometimes if we have to change skill sets of team members, depending on where we are in the life of the roadmap, we'll do so. But in the 3 takeaways is keyly to determine what is the maturity of the organization in terms of Agile, what type of SOW is going to be needed, and that'll impact the duration, of course. But at the end of the day, right, anything successful has to be relied on the foundation of your partnership. How strong is it? Do you have the trust and flexibility to need? So you have that open, fluid communications like Dave and I are establishing.
Yeah, so great feedback. We have 4 minutes as I'm managing time to make sure that we hit our target of doing a wrap-up. Check out nullshare.org. So you could, if you want to learn more about Agile practices, I have a blog out there. Most of, these presentations are also augmented for us to sit there and have dialogue after this webinar is done. If you guys are really interested, I'm putting out a bunch of leadership cards. We have one, like 2 sets that are already out there in the market. If you want to, we're allowing people to participate and create your own cards, where you could have your name on there, you could have your contact information. And so I've thrown some stuff like that together, which is, it's nothing more than you could use those things for having open dialogue with your leaders, having dialogue as a team. So it's a great resource and a tool. So if you're really interested, go out to agilityleadership.com and you could sign up. It just costs a little bit of dollars to participate in it. So I think you guys will, I hope all of the people who are participating in this webinar will get out there. We only have 54 slots, so get involved if you're very interested in that. My book, it's out on Amazon. It's called Transforming Your Leadership Character, The Lean Thinking and Agility Way. I also have the game, Agility Leadership, that's out there that you could use to engage your teams. And if you really wanted to strengthen your leadership character, look at how we could do that with lean thinking and Agile practices. This Saturday, I'm just letting you guys know, we kick off our 5 Saturdays learning facilitator workshop where we teach professionals how to help students learn Agile technology and business. If you wanted to contribute to that, just go to www.the5saturdays.org and you can contribute to that event and that stuff that we have going on, this charitable opportunity. We're a nonprofit, so get involved. I also do a podcast. I interview a lot of different people from different parts of the industry. You can get out to grokshare.com and learn more. And so if you want to reach out to me, fire me up at Twitter at nullshare, or email customercare@nullshare.org, or even you could get on our website and you can send us some information. Hey, coming up next month, June 22nd, we're going to have another webinar, and we're talking about our Agile teams together forever. And that's a very interesting topic because most people believe that they are. And hopefully we'll have a panelist who will also share their context on that. And I think, Denise, this is where you take off to let people know where to get their PDUs or SEUs.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Yes, so to earn your PDU, you will automatically receive your PDU certificate via email by the end of today. If you have any other questions, comments, feedback, anything else I can help you with, please feel free to reach me at denise.rodriguez@projectinsight.com. You will earn a 1 PDU per webinar session attended. Please remember that this only applies to project management category and Agile category. To register your PDUs, go to pmi.org and log in as a member of PMI, select course or training, and fill out all the information below, which will also be available within your PDU certificate. For those of you on social media, I'd like to invite you to follow, like, and subscribe to our social media channels. Our handle on Twitter is @ProjectInsight. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube for the latest in PI news. And if you haven't already heard, I'm now hosting the PI Fridays, Facebook Fridays, every other Friday alongside my other marketing half, Chanel. So we do bring you the latest in industry topics, introductions with some of our Rockstar PI team members, and other fun segments. So don't forget to tune in tomorrow to Facebook Live at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And finally, in our Project Insight community, you'll find many recorded webinars and videos for you to watch and learn from. Please feel free to sign up for your next project management training, IT methodology, Agile. We do have some great leadership recordings on there, as well as our product training webinars. So they are all free. Go ahead and check out our webinar calendar and register for as many as you'd like. That's all we have for you today. Thank you, Dave and Dan, for joining us. It was a great session today. You guys got a lot of kudos from our audience. So thank you so much. And of course, I'd like to thank our audience, as usual, for being awesome and participating in today's webinar. And that's all. So until then, I will see you next time. Take care, guys, and have a good weekend.
You too, Denise. You have a great one. And thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dave, for having me on again. I appreciate it. Thank you all.